Hi, welcome to the Unsung Podcast. My name is Mark Fraser, and I'm joined by two men who are wearing flannel that came off of two dead men.
This shirt is so big. I'm so happy with it. I normally wear shorts, but I don't think that's very grunge, is it?
It's not good for the people in the front row.
I know, exactly. Hi.
Yeah, we're going to ask you guys a couple of favours here. One is we need you to cheer extra loud because there's been a delay on the flights to Sri Lanka and Pakistan today. So as you can see, there's a few empty seats. The other is
What do you mean? It's really busy in here.
It's just a really big room, so you can't hear the crowd. Totally up for you guys chipping in, observing, criticising, correcting our grammar. Just stick your hand up, and Mark, being some kind of compere, will point you out.
Maybe.
Thanks immediately to David Scorteccia, because he's going to provide some live musical entertainment, and from the looks of it, he's just going to sit there the whole time, even though that wasn't part of it. So, I mean, David, if you want to go for a walk or get a drink or some food, maybe press-ups.
Yeah, some pull-ups.
We do like their pizzas, those Italians. It's not just the cliche.
So you guys going to introduce each other, or is that a thing?
Oh yeah, so over here on my left is...
I was going to get in first this time.
All right. Chris Cusack, who was old when grunge happened. So he had his midlife crisis when Nirvana happened.
And even older when it happened again.
I know, exactly.
Really struggling.
So this is very nostalgic for you.
Third time, yeah.
For a lot of us, this is history, but for him, it's just a throwback.
Across the table from me is David Weaver, who preys on the elderly and their insecurities. Before the show, this won't be appreciated by the people doing the audio version of this, but for those that turned up in person, you'll notice that we've tried to dress appropriately, as advised by literally tens of thousands of videos on the internet. We didn't do the makeup one, but that's because...
Is that grunge makeup one?
Yeah, did you not see this?
I didn't see it.
No.
Dave doesn't follow us on Facebook. So.
I don't listen to them, I just turn up.
But yeah, before the show we went to get changed, and so I went to get changed and came back out, and it's like, thought you were going to get changed. Very good, yes. This is actually my posh grunge outfit because my mum threw out my other stuff.
I think that Jesus and Mary Chain t-shirt's older than me.
The Jesus Lizard t-shirt?
Yeah, I think it's older
So I'm
than
wearing
me.
the Jesus Lizard t-shirt, which isn't technically grunge, but you know, they did a split with Nirvana, so that's 10 years.
Well, he started already.
But, man, we're going to go deep. But yeah, true story. The first day I wore this t-shirt was to play a gig with what was almost certainly a grunge band, and sweated so much that I bleached out the top half of Jesus.
So it was just...
I didn't know sweat could do that.
Your life is just a metaphor, isn't it? Jesus.
Apparently
Literally.
in Dundee, sweat is extra potent.
So we're here for this Grunge Mixtape thing, which may or may not have been ill-advised. It remains to be seen at this point. And we've all picked a record each, which we'll get into at some point soon.
I'm kind of distracted by the picture of Chad Kroger as Jesus behind you. Again, for the people not here in person, the reason there was Gregorian chant at the start is because we're projecting an image of Chad Kroger onto the back wall in reverence.
Our good Lord.
Everybody, when they came in, crossed themselves and dabbed their fingers into some iron brew.
Well, let's give you a little rundown of what we're going to do today. So, as per our normal mixtape podcast, we'll be going into a sort of specific genre.
Normal,
or scene.
inverted commas,
Yeah.
given the last one.
But I suppose we'll talk about what grunge is a little bit. Chris, you've got some theories.
I've got some strong theories.
As ever, Chris has
that
gone
were
too
derived
deep.
in person at the time.
Yeah, exactly.
As you pointed out. Yeah, we're going to break the show in two. We're going to take a wee break halfway so you can go to the bar, and so that people that arrived late can creep in and try and not disrupt what's going to be seamless. And during that, Mr. Scorteccia is going to perform something really quite exceptional that he's been working on
For literally 10 minutes.
overnight. He got almost a day's warning, so I have high expectations.
And then after the break, we'll be doing our 3 albums.
After the break, each of us have picked one record, as was our want with the new metal one. although they're far better records than the new metal one.
Careful. Careful. And then we will fight for one each, and then at the end, you get to choose which one.
Yeah, whoever's lost the most blood wins.
Yep, pretty much.
Also, please excuse the sound of rustling paper, but I've
Who's
been
Russell? Sorry.
That's why we bring you here. This is why we have you for top quality banter like that.
I've been at it big time with these notes. I used up half of this jotter, 21 pages of notes. So I've also got an additional sheet, which is a guide to my notes.
I may need to take more painkillers before.
So Mark's not feeling very well because in the kind of method approach to doing these podcasts, David and I persuaded him to do heroin for a couple of weeks.
It was good,
but
to
then
begin
we were
with,
like,
but after that, it's just fucking chaos,
but you need to sober up for the podcast, so he's currently in withdrawal. But he's getting through. We've just got him hooked on painkillers instead, because that's a much more modern American epidemic.
Yeah,
I feel. Also, curiously enough, I got tagged into a post yesterday just to get this out the road because I don't want to forget it. And they've been testing mussels, the seafood off the coast of Seattle, and apparently the mussels test positive for traces of opioids. There you go. Yeah. Make of that what you will.
I have no idea what to say about that.
You say mussels and David automatically cheers.
So what is grunge, Chris?
Yeah, so
Mr. Cusack, you know all the answers.
That's been the most contentious issue since we started even considering this, and everybody's got a different opinion. Even Mr. Davy Campbell, who helped us set this up today, and immediately poo-pooed our suggestions of what was grunge.
I fucking hate grunge.
It's like, Davy,
a direct quote.
It's a bit late for that, Davy. We're about to start. But yeah, what is grunge? And yeah, so I've got a pretty strong feeling about this. An interesting.
Well, should we ask people in the audience their favourite grunge band, and then you can tell them if they're right or wrong?
If you want to get into audience participation, this
favourite grunge band? Doesn't even know.
Okay,
doesn't know what music is.
Really good start.
Favourite grunge band?
He's like
Soundgarden. Favourite grunge band? No comment.
Never heard them.
Comment.
Favourite grunge band? I'm gonna say Stone Temple Pilots. Interesting. Because he wants. Yeah, fair.
It's a bit
favourite
of a
grunge
drop
band? No, that's cool.
It's an acceptable answer.
There's no judgment here.
Never.
I don't know who Nirvana is.
Somebody had to say it. Do you have one?
Melvins is
yeah,
a good answer
fair.
and an interesting answer, and we'll go into
I think
that.
Melvins is probably a good place to start, actually.
No, I think a good place to start is for the gentleman that was like, I don't know what this is. Yeah, Melvins is an interesting one, and Stone Temple Pilots is an interesting one, because I think they're kind of diametrically opposed on the grunge spectrum. It took a lot of kind of trying to work out where and when that happened. Obviously, grunge was like a American Northwest sound, like largely associated with Seattle, but not exclusively. Stone Temple Pilots were from San Diego. Where did it come from was like a really kind of pivotal question early on, and like why was it so regional? And there were a lot of contributing factors to that. One of them was that there was a label up there, Sub Pop, which people just automatically associate with grunge, and Sub Pop made no secret of the fact that they'd kind of modelled themselves on the likes of SST and even Motown, and realised that some of the biggest movements, the most cult movements, were also kind of regionally biased, and so they just kind of looked to nurture this sound and really help promote it. There's a lot of theories about why the sound was so distinct. It's not distinct because a lot of these bands sounded very, very different, but why there was a general similarity between it. And one of them is that there was very simply like a geographical issue. Much like Glasgow, and you know, those of you that are from here, much like Glasgow, a lot of bands just didn't tour in Seattle. So I think it's some like 25 hours to Minneapolis, and I think it's between like 10 and 12 hours down to San Francisco, and then further down the coast into Los Angeles. So a lot of bands, it was just so remote that when they were doing these American tours, especially sort of mid-level bands, they just wouldn't bother going to Seattle because it was such an expense and an inconvenience for one gig. I mean, they could go up to Vancouver, which is only a few hours, but then you're crossing the border and stuff. So the musicians in Seattle became quite self-sufficient, and the scene and the audiences rallied round those bands a lot more than maybe typically they would in bigger cities like London and places like that over here. And we've kind of got the similar phenomenon, I think, in Glasgow, where, you know, because we miss out, so many people will come to London, maybe play in Leeds, maybe play in Manchester, but, you know, it's quite a jaunt for us to see some of the bands we're talking about. Actually, Melvins are pretty guilty of that. We've been trying to get them back to Scotland for ages, and it's almost impossible. So Seattle kind of was involved in the same process, and a lot of those young groups shared members, shared audiences, and kind of shared a bit of an ideology. I mean, Soundgarden, for example, were the first band from the grunge movement to sign to a major label, and the audiences, or not all of them, but a large portion of their audience quickly fell out with them. You know, they went on tour with Guns N' Roses, and people just immediately, a lot of the punks that had followed Soundgarden were just appalled by that. They just couldn't understand why they'd taken the bait. It was quite a tight-knit scene. When you actually look musically at the kind of forefathers, though, of the bands, a really key band is called Green River. Wow! And Green River was a band from like 1984 to 88, and it, as well as other members, it's kind of key because it featured Jeff Ament and Stone Gossard, who went on to be in Pearl Jam, and it also featured Mark Arm and Steve Turner, who went on to be in Mudhoney. And I think even just superficially, those two bands represent really, really different styles of grunge music. And indeed, when we were talking to Davey beforehand, he was like, you know, is Pearl Jam even grunge? You know, in a lot of minds, Pearl Jam is grunge, but then in a lot of other people's minds, Mudhoney is grunge, and that's where a lot of the kind of frictitious kind of discussion about the genre kind of originates. As it happened, there was also a guy in that band, by the way, called Bruce Fairweather, who joined a band called Love Battery and played with Jason Finn. And Jason Finn is one of the guys from Presidents of the USA.
Moving to the country, I'm gonna eat a lot of peaches. Moving to the country, gonna eat a lot of peaches. Moving to the country, gonna eat a lot of peaches. I took a little nap with a roots all twist, squished your right.
They are kind of one of those bands that they come from Seattle, but people often forget. Oh yeah, they were a Seattle group as well. As was Jimi Hendrix, was from Seattle as well. And it's like, so it's weird because for a region that had other people that came from it, but because they weren't part of this movement, folk just, it seems to kind of slip out their minds. There was other stuff going on.
Fraser Crane. Big Seattle influence on me.
More of part of the jazz scene, I believe. The soft jazz.
He was from Boston, though. She was in Boston.
Oh yeah, that's true. He relocated for the scene.
He relocated for the series, yeah.
Yeah, that's
sick.
true.
And his band tossed salads and the scrambled eggs.
Yeah.
Oh.
Sonic Youth played a big part in that scene as well, and actually Green River were one of the main initial points of contact for the Seattle scene with Sonic Youth. Sonic Youth were big fans of them, and they played together on tour, and that in itself had an influence on the musicians, because Sonic Youth were obviously really big in the 80s in the States. They were one of the big independent bands, but they kind of sounded like grunge. They had some really heavy, or at least noisy, unfussy and kind of shambolic approaches to music, which became quite associated with it, especially with Nirvana. And it was Green River's album, Come On Down. Was it an album? Was it a long EP? That's kind of retrospectively considered to be the first grunge album, even though Melvins released their Ozma just a few months later. Like Green River got in there just a wee bit earlier. They then went to record a record called Dry as a Bone, and it was the first proper release ever on Sub Pop. Until that point, they'd only done compilations. We'll come back to those compilations because they were really pretty critical. But by October, the band had split because, as kind of foreshadowed everything, Stone Gossard and Jeff Ament wanted to sign to a major, wanted to go for a kind of bigger, say metallic. Steve Turner called it a metal sound, but they were going for like more of a stadium sound, whereas Mark Arm and Steve Turner were kind of slightly appalled by that. Mark Arm wanted things to stay independent, wanted it to stay kind of small and manageable and true to the kind of punk scene they'd come from. And so the record they'd been working on, Rehab Doll, ended up just being released posthumously. The band broke up because of these kind of different objectives that they held. And I think it's a good kind of microcosm for the division in the scene anyway. So going off in one direction, you had Mark Arm and Steve Turner and Mudhoney and guys like Matt Lucan coming from the Melvins, and he was involved with Mudhoney, and then Nirvana, Kurt Cobain had been jamming with the Melvins and roadied for them and was like very closely affiliated with the Melvins. So you had this branch going off to one side who were basically punks. They were basically, slowed down, like, punk 7 inches played at the wrong speed, and that's kind of what they were trying to do, and they were, very anti-police, and a lot of the rhetoric, vandalism is as beautiful as a rock in a cop's face. And Mark Arm had actually been a witness at a very kind of famous incident with concerning a band called the U-Men. The U-Men were one of the really early bands in Seattle. And this book that I'm about to hold up, which is called Everybody Loves Our Town, by a writer called Mark Yarm, no relation to Mark Arm. And you're like, yeah, your name's totally different. But it's a really good book, and it talks about, early on, this gig by the U-Men where there was like a trough of, they played in a park, and there was like a little kind of waterway in front of them, so they filled the waterway up with lighter fluid and like tossed in a flame during their show, which ended up exploding a lot bigger than they wanted. And the families that were watching, rather than panicking, just apparently got a little bit feral and just like so invigorated by the sight of fire that they started. There was like a small riot, and the police weighed in with billy clubs and started like bashing people over the head and arresting people. It's apparently quite a pivotal moment. For
sounds like any night out in Inverness.
When you make that trek.
Just the sight of fire once a year. Very primal.
When you make the trek from Alness to
exactly.
Inverness. What's fire like in Alness? How does that go down?
It's very rare, to be honest. Yeah, we don't see it often.
You got the wheel though, didn't you?
We got the wheel, yeah, just to get out of there.
So that concert turned out to be quite a pivotal experience for it, because a lot of the people that went on to start these bands were in the crowd, including Mark Arm, not Mark Yarm.
Was Mark Yarm in the crowd?
Mark Yarm was not in the crowd. Mark Yarm is a writer, as opposed to Mark Arm, who's from Seattle and in the band Mudhoney. Let's restate that.
I know, but was he in the crowd as well?
No.
Okay, just thought I'd ask.
No.
Apparently his name's quite similar.
Yeah, his name is pretty similar, but he was apparently no relation. We will state that multiple times during the course of this as well, just to do honour to the book. But that kind of was part of this early kind of animosity that they had for the cops as well. Coming from the kind of more provincial local towns as well, the kids were like smoking dope and getting high, and there was a lot of that. And that branch of grunge seemed to be a lot more anti-authoritarian. On the other side of it, Jeff Ament and Stone Gossard decided they were going to start a band called Mother Love Bone, who are, they're fucking dreadful.
It's like...
Wait enough for that.
Well, it was... Because there was a lot of stuff like... I suppose you've got like big alternative bands at the time. You had grunge, but then on the other side you had the funk explosion and Red Hot Chili Peppers and Faith No More. And I suppose Mother Love Bone were trying to do both and failing.
I mean, it kind of sounds like a softer version of Guns N' Roses, I feel.
Yeah.
It just sounds like the sort of landfill grunge stuff. It just kind of piled up.
Yeah,
that's a good shout, actually.
Well observed.
Well, that says it all, really, doesn't it?
Very sadly, Andrew Wood, the singer, died. The only problem is Andrew Wood's death then brought us Temple of the Dog. Andrew Wood was a roommate of Chris Cornell. as well as obviously a bandmate of
Who's
Jeff
Chris Cornell?
Stone Gossard. Chris Cornell is the singer in this lady's favourite grunge band, Soundgarden. And
So Temple of the Dog were like a supergroup.
an ex-person as well.
Supergroup.
Seems like.
Expert.
Temple of the Dog were kind of set up to commemorate Andrew Wood. Chris Cornell had been writing a bunch of songs, and he wanted to get together the musicians from Mother Love Bone to, honour his friend, which, genuinely, they were pretty upset about it. Cornell was obviously quite an emotional guy, and to lose a friend so young hit the guy pretty hard. So Andrew Wood actually died, I think it was about 2 days before Mother Love Bone's debut album, Apple, was released, which again was part of why people really wanted to try and do something to commemorate him.
How did I?
He died of an overdose, I believe.
Oh, okay.
And then was followed by Temple of the Dog. David, you going to pull up some Temple of the Dog?
Do we want some Temple of the Dog?
Maybe Hungry. Hungry would be a classic.
Yeah, I can do that. I listened to this week and didn't enjoy it at all.
The blood is on the table and the mouths are choking. I'm going hungry. I don't mind stealing bread from the mouth.
I think I was slipping into a coma there.
91.
1991, Temple of the Dog.
Yeah.
Peak grunge. Peak grunge.
Yeah, so I
grunge.
mean, I suppose we're talking about late 80s, early 90s here, aren't we? It's very of an era.
Yeah, I mean, funnily enough, like Soundgarden
Yeah.
were Someone had to get in first. So Soundgarden were actually started in 1984, which kind of blew my mind out. Actually,
Is that still playing? Could you turn that off?
setting the tone. Soundgarden were 1984, which was pretty strange to me, because I always assumed, I guess, when they peaked was when they arrived, but it clearly wasn't. And I think it's actually interesting to talk about that in general, because all these bands were happening before grunge really was making a big mark. So I was pretty curious, because when you take a straw poll, people are like, oh, grunge was like 91, 92. Not at all. Like, so I kind of went back through like Billboard 200 as part of this kind of thorough research that I did to try and work out, what were the top albums was. And so like 1990, top acts that year were like Phil Collins, Vanilla Ice, Milli Vanilli, MC Hammer. And in 91, I was like, okay, you start to see the grunge ones, but it's like Guns N' Roses, Metallica, Van Halen, Skid Row. It's a lot more rock. It's like the kind of cock rock era. NWA were there as well, U2 were there, Michael Jackson. It wasn't until 1992 that the first grunge stuff started to really show up. Nevermind hit number one a couple of times, but then it was stuff like Michael Bolton, Billy Ray Cyrus. Into 93, Nirvana again, and then Verses by Pearl Jam made an appearance, but that was alongside like Whitney Houston, Cypress Hill. So you're already at like 93, bearing in mind that Cobain died in 94, and from that point on, the music press started to get pretty cynical about why grunge was still hanging about. It was pretty late before it started to actually make big money. In 94, it kind of happened. So you had Alice in Chains with Jar of Flies. Nirvana Unplugged was our number one record. Soundgarden, Super Unknown, Stone Temple Pilots, although it was purple, not core, and Pearl Jam's Vitality. Vitality also apparently made the biggest jump in chart history ever, from like 173 to number one in 1 week.
What for? Like a single or something?
Did somebody die that year or something?
Cobain.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Well, apparently Eddie Vedder was pretty sore about that. Eddie Vedder didn't take that very well, because albeit Nirvana had kind of mocked Pearl Jam earlier on in their career, he'd actually kind of mended things with Vedder towards the end of his life, and had come out and said that he was kind of ashamed about the comments he'd made about him, that Eddie Vedder was like a thoroughly decent human being. But Vitality took a really big jump at that point, and it's actually a pretty good record. I mean, I personally can't stand 10, and Verses is pretty cheesy. It's like a kind of heavier Hootie and the Blowfish, but by Vitalogy. They were doing some pretty interesting music. Even the sleeve art in that album is amazing as well. Really, really beautiful. And it did seem to reflect a kind of darkening of the mood around Cobain's death. The guys from Mudhoney said that they'd been really popular in the UK up until about 93, 94, and then when Kurt Cobain died, the album they brought out after that, they were like, the reception was totally hostile. Like, it was, and it didn't seem to be based, a lot of the reviews weren't really based on like how good is this record or otherwise. It was, why are you guys still playing music? Kurt Cobain's dead. The Mudhoney are still going. So it's like, Mark Arm was pretty sore about that at the time. Sore arm.
Why do you think a worm turns?
Bit like you, Mark.
Sore arm, aye.
Mark's sore arm.
Nah,
That's not Mark Yarm, by the way.
it's not. Apparently he wasn't there at the start, so. I was going to say, so why do you think it changed so powerfully? Because it seems like it was obviously a huge thing that year. And the fans, obviously, it was selling records by the bucket load, it would appear.
Well, I think one of the big problems was that the bands around grunge started to, I mean, with any genre that explodes, there's a hell of a lot of like stuff, mushrooms that sprout up around it, you know. And we've touched on a lot of those names when we were doing the notes for this, you know. We actually compiled a pretty thorough list over beers, I seem to remember.
Yeah, we did. It was a long 15 minutes.
But yeah, there was a kind of second wave of stuff that came out on the back of that, which was bands like Bush, yeah, Life of Agony.
Have we got to this point already? I thought we were going to wait a bit longer before we get into
By
this
the way, Life
huge
of
stuff.
Agony, I didn't know this. I was looking them up, and I listened to Life of Agony as a bit of a guilty pleasure when I was younger. The frontman, Keith Caputo,
Keith
is now...
Caputo, I remember him.
is
yeah.
now Mina Caputo,
Mhm.
transgender, and was quite a big shock to the metal community,
Yeah.
especially that they moved in. That was like pretty fascinating. I didn't know that.
I don't think I would have personally called them a grunge band, to be honest, but what do I know?
Yeah, that's pretty grungy.
That was very grungy. So there was a whole glut of bands that kind of sprung up around grunge, and I think people started to get really sick of it really quick. In the UK, there was like Bivouac, there was a band called Paw, there was a Curb Dog. So I think basically what happened was that the media started to get pretty sick of it pretty fast. There was also, we spoke about a phenomenon as well, that the reach of grunge seemed to go a lot faster than just the reach of like hard rock. There was a sudden injection into the charts of, I mean, some of the stuff that we actually spoke about there, but there was a sudden injection of stuff like Alanis Morissette, which is like the number 7 biggest selling album of all time.
Yeah, Jagged Little Pill.
Yeah. Bearing in mind that Alanis Morissette was singing like the national anthem in football stadiums and was, by all accounts, looking like she was going to be like some sort of Celine Dion type character, and was redirected into this kind of alternative persona, you started to see the grunge thing reflected in pop music, and even like I mentioned them, Hootie and the Blowfish and Mike and the Mechanics, and there was like this ultra light version of like the grunge aesthetic, rustic people in like checked shirts and
Deep Blue Something, Breakfast at
well, we
Tiffany's.
spoke about that, yeah, like a lot.
It's a fucking... Yeah,
Crash
Crash
Test-
Test
Oh,
Dummies.
yeah.
And so there was,
Sorry.
4 Non-Blondes. When was
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
Actually, there's a name for this kind of music. I read about this on Wikipedia the other day. I'm going to have to find it.
Yeah, it was also a fashion thing as well. Like,
Yeah, but can another one is Natalie Imbruglia, and few people
don't be
like,
slagging Natalie now. Careful how
aside
you
from the
tread.
fact that was she not going out with Daniel Johns from the Mighty Silverchair?
Daniel Johns was going out with
Mighty
Natalie Imbruglia.
Pretty certain that was a thing.
Yeah.
Well, they're both Australian. But yeah, so there was a it started to bleed into like pop music. Stuff like Counting Crows was really big as well. Counting Crows were like this sort of, you could, yeah, okay, they maybe came for stuff like R.E.M. a little bit, but there was a much more of a grungier feel to that kind of thing. So people were just getting sick to the back teeth of it. Like, I mean, I can't say I blame them. I remember being about at the time, and it was just saturated. And you said as well, there was a fashion thing. There was a sudden fixation on grunge chic that happened pretty quickly. I mean,
And that was when like Gap was at its biggest. You know, that sort of mid-90s. We can get aspirational people to dress like a slacker as well.
So here's a quality clip that I want to throw out for the crowd here.
Yeah.
I found a couple of things on grunge fashion. Check this out.
So this week on How to Dress, we're talking about grown-up grunge. Now, that might strike fear into your heart if you were there the first time around with Nirvana and Kurt Cobain and Courtney Love and all those types, and you wore Doc Martens and big floral dresses, but I'm afraid it is back. So how do you wear it if you're a grown-up? I mean, there's going to be plaid all over the high street, camouflage print. I mean, I blame...
That's a woman in a knitted sweater with a shirt under it being told
£325.
£325 cashmere sweater.
So when's this from?
This is from, I think, the third iteration of grunge. And from the time itself, we had a pretty fascinating demonstration. Check this out.
Designer Anna Sui goes grunge. She reinterprets the street looks worn by the fans of Seattle's guitar grinding music group.
And people are into a more individual look. It's not about status or dressing for to show off your money. It's more to show off like what it is that you're feeling, what you're trying to express. So that's...
I'll skip it forward to the picture of Naomi Campbell, because nothing screams grunge like a woman with little butterflies stuck in her nipples.
Yeah, that's what Kurt died for, right there. That's what he wanted.
Yeah, so like Mudhoney felt the backlash against grunge because grunge was just frankly just saturating everything, and things started to go south pretty quickly. As we said, like, the side of grunge that they represented, that Nirvana represented, that the Melvins represented, had sprung up from that much dirtier origin. It sprung up from stuff like Black Flag. They had an album called My War, and the second side of My War is credited as being a huge influence on those guys because it was so much slower and so much heavier. Also, I think it goes without saying, quite severely influenced by Black Sabbath at the time as well. And
that's something I'm going to pick up as well later on. Yeah, I think there's a lot of Black Sabbath and a lot of grunge stuff, especially riff-wise. You can hear pretty much everywhere, which is why I struggle sometimes thinking some of the stuff is grunge, because it just kind of sounds like sludgy kind of metal to me. But again, what do I know?
There we go. There were also, I kind of touched on it earlier on, like, one of the big factors in popularising grunge was Sub Pop. And Sub Pop they pulled a masterstroke at the time. The actual genesis of Sub Pop's kind of interesting. It's more interesting than I thought it was to begin with. It was a guy called Bruce Pavitt in the early 80s started a fanzine called Subterranean Pop, based out of Evergreen State College, which is a place that's recently been in the news because of Brett Weinstein and the Days of Absence controversy. And I think by episode 5 of this fanzine, they were shifting 2,000 copies, which is mental. Like, at what point do you stop being a fanzine? But there was a cassette that came with it, and a compilation cassette of different bands, and so, like I said, 2,000 copies of this cassette. It's nothing to sniff at, considering you can get into the charts now, pretty high in the charts, with 10,000 of anything. In 1986, Pavitt started Sub Pop as a record label, and 86 was a big year because not only did he release a thing called Sub Pop 100, but there was CZ Records, also in the Northwest, released a thing called the Deep Six compilation. Now, the Deep Six compilation had Melvins, Soundgarden, Green River, Skinyard, and that band The Human that I mentioned from earlier with the riot in the park. And Sub Pop 100 was introduced by Steve Albini. Had Scratch Acid, which was the guys that went on to be Jesus Lizard, the Wipers, Sonic Youth, Naked Ray Gun, Skinny Puppy, weirdly enough, and Shonen Knife for Japan. Now, although that's not a lot of Seattle bands, those are a lot of the bands that people associate with grunge that were kind of peripheral to it. Then including bands like Butthole Surfers and things like that as well, who were, I think, based out of Minneapolis at the time. The Sub Pop 100 compilation was hugely influential. Deep Six predated it, but Sub Pop 100 just went, and still is, a total cult classic. And they followed that in 1988 by Sub Pop 200, which is a bit more typically what you think of with Seattle, which was Tad, Soundgarden, Green River, Beat Happening, Fastbacks, Screaming Trees, and the Walkabouts. And so this label started to try and corner this idea of a particular scene and a particular sound. In '87, a guy called Jonathan Poneman invested $20,000 into Sub Pop. Sub Pop was a really small thing at the time. It had done a couple of very low-level releases. Poneman was a huge Soundgarden fan. He was working as a DJ at the time, and he really wanted Soundgarden to get a proper release. And that was basically his motivation for getting involved with Sub Pop. So they incorporated the company in '88, I think it was, and went on to release early Soundgarden stuff. They also established a thing called the Singles Club, where people just paid a subscription and they would get sent out vinyls on a monthly basis, a choice single, and those are so collectible now, like insanely collectible.
The first one was Love Buzz.
Yeah, that's
Nirvana,
right. First ever.
Imagine doing that now. That'd be insane.
Well, Too Pure did that down in Wales for a while. They did that with bands like McCluskey, and I think PJ Harvey was in Too Pure as well. But they tried to copy that. But as I said, like, those guys basically identified early on that there was a geographical advantage to having a sound for a label. And albeit they did work with people from, further afield, like even just affiliates like Dinosaur Jr. and things like that, they were pretty canny. They also had another idea, which we maybe take for granted, but they realised that for a lot of musicians in America, because the market's so big and it's so expensive, a good way to do it is to conquer the UK and work backwards. And Jimi Hendrix did that, and even bands like Dandy Warhols did that as well. They actually flew a guy out called Everett True, who's since become really closely tied with stories about Nirvana and stories about the Seattle scene. They flew him out, he worked for Melody Maker at the time, and just kind of gave him a tour. And he did this huge in-depth piece about what was going on in Seattle, including interviews with people. And that was massive over here. That was like a massive breakthrough in the media over here, who started to learn about grunge and learn about what was happening in Seattle. And it was a total coup for Sub Pop, because they were immediately placing themselves at the top of that in everybody's mind. Alongside that, there was a small but really, really important group of people who were contributing to the aesthetic of grunge. There was a producer called Jack Endino who did everything really to start with. I think he did 75 different recordings for Sub Pop to try and make sure there was a consistency in the sound. So he did Bleach, obviously. He did some Soundgarden stuff, and he worked with a lot of other people, including people like L7, who also became associated with it, even though they're from LA.
America thinks I should be proud.
Jack and Dino was key to them trying to kind of capture this sort of sense of like what it was. And so you kind of start to see how this insular movement was forming. You start to see, like, when you consider that these bands had shared common members in the early days, Melvins especially had slowed down their sound, because they were actually a really fast band when they started. Melvins on the scene were like known for being the fastest group, and just because they're Melvins and they're so fucking obstinate, they decided, let's make everything as sludgy and kind of lumping as we possibly can.
I can roll the piston. I seal a right turn only. Make seal the right turn. She knows a bit around me.
So there's these various elements are all kind of aligning. There's also a really, really important factor in the form of a guy called Charles Peterson, who's a photographer. And I've got some images here. You'll definitely recognise them from the work at the time. So Charles Peterson took some of the most famous images to come out of grunge. This one is Mudhoney, and that's the cover of Superfuzz Big Muff.
It's a good album.
Yeah, that's actually Fugazi, Guy Picciotto, on one of their Northwest tours. Chris Cornell, I think that's it's the cover of Screaming Life, maybe. It's one of the Soundgarden records that's in the front as well. It's a really famous crowd diver, I think, at a Nirvana show. Both of these, in fact, I think, are in the Muddy Banks of the Wishcat album. But even in the art, and you can see the aesthetic forming in that. And it's kind of important as well not to overlook him. There's a guy in the UK called Steve Gulick. Steve Gulick didn't do so much of the live photography, but he took some of the really famous images of the time of the bands. We'll put these on the Facebook page for people that are listening. And Steve Gulick was actually British and contributed to that kind of domination of the UK scene by grunge, that sudden uptick in interest. And that bled back over the Atlantic. Mudhoney were huge over here, Sonic Youth were huge, but any band they brought across got huge. They toured with Hole. There was like all kinds of things. Mudhoney toured with Hole. There was a kind of passing the baton thing going on, and grunge, as it got bigger over here, people took more and more notice of it in the States. It's also kind of interesting, but you see the band Bush, even though they were about concurrently, and people kind of talk about them as being sort of
Rubbish.
rubbish. They kind of talk about them as being a second generation band, but they really weren't. They were about from 91 or 92. They just were obviously a band that were aping something that they saw, but they weren't the only ones. But Bush have sold 10 million records. 10 million records. And at the time, they were playing, I think they'd sold some like 2 million records in the States with 16 Stone. And over here, they were playing in pubs, which was astonishing. Like, there was just such a difference that they took over there as a British grunge band. So it was a kind of pretty confused state of affairs. So Indino, Peterson, Gulick, and then Pavitt and Poneman, who I think have said openly, it was a beautiful coincidence in coming together of circumstances that brought grunge to the fore and helped Sub Pop cement its reputation. They said Peterson was there to capture the look, and Dino was there to capture the sound, and me and Bruce were here to exploit the local community. And they're pretty comfortable with that, and they certainly did. Sub Pop was kept afloat for probably the best part of a decade by the royalties it got off of Nevermind. Sub Pop actually has had a renewed lease of life, but in a completely different fashion now. It's had some very successful acts in the last 15 years. Fleet Foxes, The Shins, Slater Kinney, Flight of the Conchords are on Sub Pop for some reason. Band of Horses, Foals, Beach House. Kind of reinvented their musical style, but a lot of that was only enabled by the fact that we were able to keep going as an organisation because of the revenue they got from Nevermind. I do believe Pavitt, who started it, quit in protest at one point as well, because Sub Pop sold 49% of its shares to Warner Brothers, kind of forfeiting that kind of truly independent thing, albeit they still had 51% majority stake. But they fell out about that, and it took about 7 years for Pavitt and Poneman to talk again. So another factor in where this grunge sound was coming from. But a lot of the bigger bands that were the more polished side of that spectrum, Alice in Chains, Pearl Jam, were not really involved with Sub Pop. Sub Pop was dealing with the sort of murkier stuff, and Soundgarden kind of straddled that a wee bit. Soundgarden were the sort of arena rock band, but far more interesting than I think people give them credit for. We'll talk about Soundgarden a wee bit more later on, but amongst their cheesy, like incredibly high-pitched crooning, they also had a lot of really gloomy, dark, heavy stuff, and a lot more going on. But also, just an interesting fact, if you submitted your demo to Sub Pop, and I know this from experience, if you submitted your demo to Sub Pop and were unsuccessful, they sent you a letter that started, "Dear Loser."
Excellent.
Thanks, guys. That actually stayed with me.
It's a fairly thorough background of grunge there, Chris.
Thanks.
Thanks very much.
I need to get my breath back and take a drink here.
Well, Neil Young's the godfather of grunge. Look at him. He just looks like a grungy man. But like a lot of grungy folk took Neil Young influences, because there's a lot of sort of distorted guitars and flannel shirts involved in the 70s and 80s Neil Young stuff. And he also just didn't really give a fuck about anything. And then, you've got Pearl Jam covering him. And then, of course, Kurt paraphrasing him in his suicide note as well. So, Neil Young's always kind of there as a big grunge influence. I love Neil Young.
I tried to kind of subdivide the word grunge into some slightly more accurate terms.
Jesus.
Why?
I don't know, I was bored. And it was about 3
You wrote
a.m.
21
You need to be
chapters in
busier,
notes and you were
man.
bored.
You need to do more stuff.
Yeah, I thought like Mudhoney, we could refer to them as garunge, because they're garage.
Oh, right, okay.
You see where I'm going with that? Melvin's was kind of very muddy, so we call them grunge.
Fuck off. No, it's like sludgy grunge, so it could be slunge.
Creed, and I'd actually written Stone Temple Pilots, so don't take this personally. I thought we'd call them grunge.
Are you having a stroke?
And this was my favourite one. Bush, I thought we could call clunge. And that works in 2 levels.
That's fine. I'm happy with that.
I think there's one more thing that we haven't mentioned that kind of goes kind of concurrently with the fashion aspect. Has anybody seen the film Singles? Right. So if you haven't seen the film Singles, and
For the record, that was one person.
way at the back, we could barely see them up there in the nosebleeds. The film Singles came out in 1992. It's by the guy Cameron Crowe, who did what did he do? Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Jerry Maguire, Almost Famous, which is actually about him traveling with bands. But Singles is, it's fucking terrible. But it's basically a whole bunch of people's romantic relationships set to the backdrop of grunge in Seattle in '92. It's got Matt Dillon as like the main actor and Bridget Fonda as the main actress. Cameron Crowe, after they made it, apparently Warner were so happy with it that they wanted to make a TV series of Singles, but it never really took, or it never really got off the boards, except Cameron Crowe maintains that it did. And apparently Friends, according to Cameron Crowe, sprung out of Singles, this kind of like various couples in an overlapping drama thing. And there is nothing more 90s than grunge and Friends. That is the grunge, that is the 90s singularity right there. But there's some interesting things about Singles. It's not great, but if you want to flick through it, the band in it was called Citizen Dick, which was made up mostly, there's a scene in a diner, and you can see that the band is mostly just Pearl Jam, sitting there looking gormless. All the clothes that Matt Dillon wears, he just borrowed off Jeff Ament, so as ridiculous as they look, they were just Jeff Ament's actual wardrobe. Chris Cornell's in it, Alice in Chains are in it, they perform in one scene. There's a whole bunch of song names in it for Citizen Dick that were just ridiculous throwaway song names, and Chris Cornell apparently decided to challenge himself and write a bunch of tunes to these names, which includes Spoonman. That's why it's such a fucking stupid subject for a song, because Chris Cornell promised them that he was going to do it, and he wrote Spoonman. And if you watch the film, there's a bit where someone's playing an acoustic guitar in the background, and it's Spoonman, or an early version of Spoonman that he's playing. They also had a tune in it called Touch Me, I'm Dick. Giving a little nod to Mudhoney's first single, which was also, I think, the first record put out after Sub Pop Incorporated. There you go. But yeah, I think that's a pretty comprehensive rundown on the mess that was going on in the Northwest at the time.
In researching this, and was very similar to how I did my degree, so I just went onto Wikipedia. And I thought this sentence really summed it up perfectly. Although most grunge bands had disbanded or faded away from view by the late 1990s, they influenced modern rock music as their lyrics brought socially conscious issues into pop culture and added introspection and an exploration of what it means to be true to oneself. That's a link you can click. Be true to oneself.
Where does that
Dare
go?
not do that.
Does that link go to a cult?
I'm not going to click it. But grunge was also an influence on later genres such as post-grunge, e.g. Creed and Nickelback, and nu metal, e.g. Korn and Limp Bizkit.
Post-grunge, aka neo-grunge.
Well, I mean, this is what Wikipedia says here. So
Yeah, there was
basically, grunge influenced us to be miserable and inward.
Yeah, I mean,
and
it was
create
interesting
Limp
because,
Bizkit.
again,
Great. Carry on.
steady. Going through those, I mean, the legacy of grunge is shameful. When you get into the second and third generation of the bands that it produced, like Creed being second generation, weirdly enough, because I think they actually brought out their first record in '97 or something like that. And obviously Nickelback, peace be upon him. But I mean, we had a list of some pretty horrendous. I think I've got this. list.
I think I told you this before.
Remember this
but
list, David?
Back in high school, I was like basically the only person that could play guitar.
Oh yeah.
So when there was a talent contest, and any kid in the few years below me had to do a song, then I'd get asked to come and play the guitar. And this little one kid, Ross, he got bullied so hard. But he was a little chubby guy with curly hair, and he wanted to cover How You Remind Me by Nickelback in front of the whole school, and I had to play guitar for him. And he, for that 4 minutes, he was a king. The crowd in school absolutely loved him. And I had a terrible time playing that song. I fucking hate it. I fucking hate Nickelback.
So, so the second iteration of grunge, we'll give them the benefit of the doubt, included people like Live and Matchbox 20, Bivouac, stuff like that. The third iteration of grunge, second to third straddling. David, you came up with some brilliant names in this, and for someone that claims not to actually like or know a lot about grunge, we were sitting and he was just, we had to stop him at one point because the tone of the conversation got so low. But we had Three Doors Down, Puddle of Mud. You're going to have to hold.
Puddle of Mud with 2 Ds. on the
Don't
mud.
get angry too soon because it's going to get worse. Stained. Apparently,
Brilliant.
Hoobastank listed as it, but I think
Hoobastank were like that crossover
'cause
with nu
some-
metal.
they're on their way to Incubus as well, though, aren't
Theory
they?
of a Dead Man, Chevelle,
Theory of a Dead Man,
Seether.
Seether, Stone Sour. and
I would say Stone Sour, yeah. That was my choice.
that-
Not my choice, but my, my suggestion.
You're so proud of it.
I'm so proud of it.
But yeah, there was some really horrendous stuff came off the back of that, and is in some ways still with us. I mean, Nickelback's record sales are unbelievable. Like, I mean, in both senses. The fact that they exist, but in the fact that they are just enormous. Like, to this day, enormous. I mean,
My sister owns a copy of that Silver Side Up. Doesn't even like rock music.
does she drive a BMW?
No. She lives in Norway.
Because it's
No, Denmark, sorry.
It's absolutely that kind of album. I've got one more thing I want to throw in here, just for pure macabre thrills. Right, so we mentioned Silverchair earlier on, and Daniel John's relationship with Natalie Imbruglia and so on and so on. So I was like, what the fuck what's happening with Silverchair? I know he had some illness issues.
He went so, did he not?
Well, let's see what happened with Silverchair.
Yeah.
So a little reminder here, right?
Funny sometimes.
Check out this first line. As good as it was way back then. So that was Silverchair. What year was that? I don't even know what year that was. David?
1988 maybe?
Thereabouts. And looking every part Nirvana as well, especially the drummer. Like, if you were trying to impersonate Dave Grohl in Nirvana, you couldn't do it much better. So here's Silverchair about 5 years ago. This is sensational. I'll skip a little bit forward. And you're thinking, it's going to kick in, right? Hang on, you're thinking, no, but it's going to kick in, they're just taking their time.
I can't wait for the riff.
You can't wait to get a fucking shirt on. Here we go, guys. Oh. But it actually, hard as it is to believe, gets a little bit worse for Daniel.
Just let him do what he wants, man. It's a hard life.
You're so judgmental.
So
Chris.
last year, Daniel was like, right, Silverchair's done, guys. I got the message, finally.
Has he done a solo pop thing?
He has, it's not a solo pop thing, but it's special. This is Dreams, featuring Daniel Johns, and viewer discretion is advised. Just waiting for the riff.
I don't think it's going to come, is it? It's very easy.
What's going to come is a smashing bit of facial acting. That's what's going to come. Check this out. See, he's pretending to be a robot there.
Make it stop.
That's very cool. He's pretty cool.
Schadenfreude. That's what that was. Yeah, so on that note, let's kill this.
Before we
first
do that,
one.
I want to tie up all loose ends. When I was talking about that 4 non-blonde singer earlier on, the genre was apparently called foxcore.
Falsecore.
Foxcore.
Foxcore.
So it was a term coined by Thurston Moore in the early 90s to describe a wave of loud and aggressive female-fronted bands that was occurring at the time.
Thurston Moore got his balls heavily booted for that, by the way. Like, he was seriously slapped in the dish by the right girls.
Yep, but it contains a lot of right girl bands in Wikipedia's opinion. But
Thurston Moore's entire career since then has been trying to make up for that because he knew he was going to be Me Too'd like fuck. Yeah.
Okay.
So in the second half of this, we are going to get
Deep
something deep.
on particular albums.
Fox deep in an album each. David, your album shall be?
My album is going to be Bad Motorfinger by Soundgarden.
An interesting and weighty choice.
It's because it's the best one.
Mark?
I'm going to be picking Silver Side Up by Nickelback.
You troll. Mark?
No, Super Fuzz Big Muff by Mudhoney. Just the correct choice.
And I will be choosing, I already have chosen, Live Through This by Hole.
Yeah.
Controversial one.
Oh, you will notice there's no Nirvana there. But that's
Nirvana,
not us trying to be contrary. That's because we will probably do a Nirvana record on its own.
well, I think
for a
yeah,
podcast.
we kind of ruled them out in the same way we ruled Deftones out of the new metal one, to spare them, and also because it means we can focus on them. I think a more interesting omission is that there's not a Melvins record in there. And
There almost was.
there almost was, yeah. We were kind of trying to decide what to do, but I think we're going to do a Melvins episode. But for the record, I would have put in a Senile Animal. Although we could have done Houdini, which is the only album that Kurt Cobain ever produced. In inverted commas, yeah. He produced some of it so badly that they had to get it reproduced. But
Anyway, we're going to go away for a drink for 10 minutes. Let
Mhm.
you move your bums and get
so,
feeling back in your legs.
but during that gap, the sneezing gentleman in the corner, allergic to bad patter, is going to perform really quite exceptionally quickly learned versions of grunge classics while you guys go to the bar. And we're going to go to the bar for him because he'll be too busy jamming. And we'll see you in like 10 minutes, 15 minutes.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Thank you.